right, back in the shop today to do a little work on the buggy. If you saw in my last video, I mentioned that I wanted to get a heavier duty alternator to deal with the really high draw of both the winch, but also primarily the rear steer pump. So we got that in from Summit, so we're gonna be working on that today. All right, there it is installed. We'll see if it helps the backup camera situation in the long run. I started it up, ran it for a little bit, and it's holding 14 volts better than the other one was when I was running the rear steer in high load. I turned everything on and it's still able to keep up. So either way, it's gonna be better than what I had. This particular alternator has a lug on there with paint and powder coat removed, making it convenient to run an extra ground wire. So ran a ground wire down to the engine block, which is grounded well with a ground wire to the main bus. All right, new day. Got the alternator in and tested, and it's working fantastic. It's definitely keeping up a lot better than the stock alternator, but I do have some additional work today, and that's what we're gonna be working on right now. If you see on this particular alternator, there's 3 connections. One of them is the remote voltage sense, which is just a signal that comes from the main bus that is the alternator's source for voltage regulation. The other wire is the excite wire that actually turns on the alternator. That's on an ignition source. But the last wire that I had connected, which is this one on this side, it's sometimes labeled P or phase on most alternators that have a 4-wire setup. That is essentially a 12-volt signal that emits from the alternator when it's charging. And it's useful for connecting to things like a Hobbs meter, so you can run the Hobbs meter when the engine is running. Now, when I say Hobbs meter, this is what I'm talking about. It's an hour meter that's a 12-volt signal. It's got a little crystal in there that counts time whenever it has power. So the idea there being is this device will track the hours that the engine is running, and that P wire on the alternator was a good signal for that. This aftermarket alternator, though, doesn't have that. It's probably, set up for factory application. They don't figure if people are going to be using things like Hobbs meters. So this is my harness, and it has the wire here, but if you look at the actual pins inside the female end on the alternator, there's no 4th wire. So what I'm gonna need to do is I'm gonna have to pull a different 12-volt signal. If you followed my earlier videos, a lot of my wiring is under the passenger seat. First order of the day here is to take the passenger seat out so I can get back to have access to my wires. And what I'm planned to do is there's an ignition bus under here that I use to pull power from when the ignition is on. Now, the ignition circuit in this runs the computer primarily, the computer and all the, the fuel system and everything. And I have a few accessories coming off of that make sense to be ignition sourced, or basically supplied with power when the computer is on, one of which is the dash. So I think that's gonna be my next best bet for a Hobbs meter signal. It's not gonna be as good of a estimate of engine runtime. It's gonna be more conservative because it's gonna be running that Hobbs meter whenever the ignition is on, whenever the computer's on. But anything more complicated than that, and I'd have to, the other thing I thought of is I could pull like an RPM signal from maybe the dash or the computer itself, but I'd need a microcontroller I could set up a microcontroller and use that as the signal for the Hobbs meter, you know, running a relay or something, but which I could do, but I just don't feel like setting all that up. So I think the next best bet is just gonna be ignition. So that's what we'll be working on today. I'm gonna be tearing the seat out, and then I'll be running a wire from under here to over to that Hobbs meter. All right, so there we are. That took about 15 minutes or so. It's obviously not the most convenient thing to have to mess with wiring in this rig because of having to take the seat out, but it doesn't take all that long. The hardest part, honestly, is just getting to these bolts, getting to this particular bolt down here because there's a lot of stuff in the way and it's kind of crammed under there. So obviously I wouldn't have liked to have had to tear all this apart to mess with this, but it does give me an opportunity to check on everything under here and see how, after driving it a little bit, see how things have shifted and moved and whatnot, and whether or not I need to secure things any more than they already are. The ignition bus that I was talking about is down here, so I'll get to messing with that now. These clear heat shrink are super nice for labeling wires really good. There you have it. All right, well, that's all back together. And here's this side. Can't even really tell the difference. The old one, I just zip tied under there, taped it off and zip tied it with it. You can see the yellow one is actually the old one. It goes into the harness up there, further along. You saw I loomed out another wire for the new wire. So there it is, new Hobbs meter wire ran. That alternator setup's gonna be much better. All right, new day. Got something new to try on the Buggy brake situation. Check it out. I have this pressure bleeder kit, which I have tried already. And this is just some generic one that I got. But the problem is, the plate is like way too big. So it barely fits in there even, and it won't clamp down very well. I ended up just making a mess when I used it, and these holes are like almost
too wide for the master cylinder. The master cylinder width is only like a little tiny bit wider than that. So that's kind of a problem. Like I sort of got it to seal, but you know, not exactly. So a couple of options. I'm thinking of modifying this plate. I need to deal with these holes being too close to the edge. And also it's too long. I'm thinking if I just cut it right here and then just use one of the holes, it's gonna one fit better, and I should be able to get a good seal and get a nice strong pressure bleed. I'm thinking that I got air trapped in there and none of the other bleeding methods are just getting it out. So that's the next maneuver, I think. The one challenge that I'm gonna have with this is cutting this. I'm gonna have to figure out how to seal it. It looks like, you know, this is a manifold for, you know, the air to flow. I don't know when that stops in there, but either way, cutting this off, I'm gonna be left with a hole in the end of the manifold. So I'll have to seal that up somehow. This appears to be aluminum. I don't know if it's cast. It's probably cast. Yeah, it feels like it's cast aluminum. So I could try taking a piece out of it and welding that onto the end of it. That'll probably be my best bet. Unless I just have some way to plug it or something. It doesn't have to seal perfect. I just need to be able to get a good pressure bleed. So that's what I'll start with messing with today. That'll do it for this one. Got the charging system upgraded with that new alternator, and with the modifications done to the brake bleeder, I was able to make some progress on the brakes. So I'll leave you here with some footage of having a little fun with it and just trying to get the brakes sorted out. I'll keep plugging away at it and getting the bugs sorted out. Thanks for watching.